One thing that we probably all love is the sound of great jazz phrasing in a solo. In the end, it's much more about how you play the notes than what notes you're actually playing. This George Benson solo that I covered some examples from in a recent video is a great example of a solo with extraordinary, fantastic phrasing. And when you're listening to this, you of course want to sound like that. And that makes you ask yourself a few questions. Like, why does it sound great? What should you practice? And how do you make lines that sound like this? And surprisingly, some of the answers are actually going against what you normally teach people when they're trying to learn jazz. My name is Jens Larsen. Learn jazz, make music. I've talked about what makes jazz phrasing sound great in other videos, and there are of course many things that need to come together for it to sound really good, but one really important thing is that you're playing lines that allow you to add some accents to the different eighth note lines that you're playing. And this is because if you don't have that, then they just sound like this long row of monotonous, boring eighth notes. But if you make lines where you can actually add some interesting swinging accents, then you get something that sounds a lot more surprising, a lot more interesting for the listener. So if we try to be a little bit scientific about it and slow down the second part of the example that I played in the beginning, it sounds like this. So if we overstate the phrasing a little bit, then there's an accent on the high E, on the G at the end of the G7 bar also, on the D also, so, and then on the high C. If you are already playing, and especially if you're listening to jazz, then you probably already have sort of an intuitive idea about this. So if you were to sing a line just thinking about the phrasing, then you would probably naturally just go from boo-ba-doo, de-ba-doo, da-ba. So you kind of have built in the way that you're singing it already some accents in there, and you want to find a way to practice and to work with your material so that when you're playing, you also have that, because it's already something you hear, you just need to get it out of your fingers. There are two places in this 4-bar example that I'm using where we can actually take something out, turn it into a scale exercise so that you can use it in different places and that way get into your system and try to use it in lines. The first one is where you have this sort of blues phrase where he runs up this Coltrane pattern, and then he has the blue note, resolving that up to the third. So I'm talking about the key here, not the chord. So that's the third, the minor third going up to the major third in C on the G7. So this movement. And you can of course apply this same idea to arpeggios. And if you do that through the scale, then you can get an exercise like this. And near the end of the phrase, we have this short fragment that you can kind of see as being a pattern of a C major 7 arpeggio. So that's this one. And here we can give the accent to the C. And you can of course take that through a scale as well and just look at it as being a diatonic arpeggio in C, and that would be this exercise. One of the things that we get confronted with when we're learning jazz is that we cannot play solos where you follow the changes and you really connect with the chords. So you're playing a lot of stuff and you can hear that it doesn't really work because it doesn't really sound like the chords that you're improvising over. The way you learn this is then to play sort of the chord tones on the heavy beat, so on beat 1 and on the beat 3, and in that way you can really hear how you're following the changes. But actually this works kind of against us when it comes to phrasing, because if you're only thinking like that, then you're going to be making lines that you cannot phrase in a nice way. You cannot put all the interesting accents because you're going to be writing lines that sound like this. And here we have a line that makes all sense. It really fits a D minor chord and we're hitting all the right notes. So third, fifth, and then another fifth and another third. But phrasing wise, it's impossible to give this a nice accent. So it's just always going to sound kind of heavy. And of course, it's okay if it's somewhere in the solo, but if all your lines sound like this, then you're missing something. And that's where you start to make lines that have more interesting phrasing using the exercises that I just went over. So here I'm using the first exercise, and I'm using it on the D minor 7, and the arpeggio that I'm using is the arpeggio from the 3rd. So that means there's an F major 7 arpeggio. First we have a G, and then we get essentially just that exercise. So the leading note on B3, and then resolving up to the 9th, to the E. So, and we have that natural accent, and then I'm just resolving it to the 3rd of C major. Another thing that's also important to check out is to just vary the types of rhythms that you're using. So here I'm really starting with some quarter notes. Again, really connecting with the chord, so just playing the 3rd and then down to the root. Then we get the second exercise, and again I'm using the F major arpeggio on the D minor, so it's the arpeggio from the 3rd, and then playing this, which gives me the accent on the F. And then on the G7, I'm using the arpeggio from the 3rd of G7, so that's a B half diminished, and then the first exercise in that, so giving me an accent on the A, and then just down the scale, resolving to the E on C major 7. As I said earlier, George Benson is a great place to go if you want to learn good phrasing, and probably you want to start by just listening. I think listening is really essential when it comes to something like phrasing. You want to have it in your system, not only as something that you're analyzing, but also as something that you've just listened to, and it kind of comes out of how you're singing and what you're hearing naturally. And then next to that, you can sort of reinforce that process by doing stuff like I'm doing here in the video, where you're really trying to build some exercises and some phrases with good phrasing, and that way building a habit and giving yourself the possibility to play like that. If you want to check out the video where I'm analyzing a little bit more of this solo phrase that I'm using, then check out this video. That's about it for this time. Thank you for watching. Until next time.